Welcome. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. Welcome to Open Door and welcome to Pentecost Sunday. Pentecost Sunday is the Sunday when we remember and reflect upon what the Holy Spirit means and how the Holy Spirit moves and operates in our lives, how it manifests itself within and among us. In the gospel traditions and in the traditions of the scriptures, the Holy Spirit manifests itself in a number of different ways. In the Gospel of John, we see Jesus breathe out on the disciples and say, receive the Holy Spirit. And the defining characteristic really had to do with their capacity to practice forgiveness. In Paul in Corinthians, chapters 12 and 13, wrote a great deal about the gift of the Holy Spirit. And there were many gifts that we experience as a result of moving and living and being moved by the Holy Spirit. And for Paul, the greatest gifts were those of faith, hope, and love. Today, we're going to be looking at a passage out of Acts, the second chapter, verses 1 through 21. And we see that another gift of the Holy Spirit is our capacity to communicate and to understand and to hear one another. And I believe today, as we live in a world that has been as divided and polarized as it ever has, I won't say that it's never been more so, because if you look at history, there's been all sorts of polarization. But this gift of the Holy Spirit, this gift of being able to hear and understand and communicate, that's an important gift for us to embrace as well. So today's passage is from Acts, the second chapter. It's a rather lengthy selection, but we wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to hear it. Starting at verse 1. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly from heaven there came a sound like a rush of violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at this sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it we hear each of us in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia." The list goes on to a number of other places, but they were all hearing in their own language. So all were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" And of course, others sneered and said, "They're filled with new wine. They're drunk." Verse 14. But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. "Men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk, as you suppose, for it's only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both women and men, I will pour out my Spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will show portents in the heaven above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and smoky mist. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the Lord's great and glorious day. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved." There's a few things that I wanted to highlight on this as we reflect on how to experience the gift of the Holy Spirit in our lives. One of the passage starts off by saying that they were together in one place. They were together in one place. There's the gift of that community plays in the role of the Holy Spirit. Oh yes, it is possible to worship God on our own. It is possible to be a follower of Jesus and to experience this without being a part of a church or any type of formalized religion whatsoever. However, we do see time and time again that there is a way of experiencing God and the fullness of God and the fullness of God's presence that takes place when we come together. It's a unique and different way, and we only seem to experience it when we come together many times. And so we see that they were together in one place when the Spirit came to them, when they experienced the Spirit. Another thing that I wanted to point out is in verse 4, it said, all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit, and they began to speak other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. The gift of the Holy Spirit is something that every single one of us has the opportunity to receive, and it does, and we do receive it. One of the things that's interesting is that we don't all receive the same gifts. Not every person who was there all had the ability to speak the same languages. That is not the case that everyone can do everything or that everyone has every gift. But together, they individually had the gifts. And so, again, all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit, and they began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. So they were together in one place, and they experienced the Spirit. They recognized that every single person that was among them had been given the gift of the Spirit, and each person used the gift that they had. They began to operate in their gift. I believe that this is an important principle for us, is that we do have to recognize that each and every person that we encounter and that are part of the community has been gifted in some way by the Holy Spirit. We also have to remember and recognize that we don't share the same gifts and the same gifting. Here in the book of Acts, it really had to do with this ability to speak and to communicate beyond one's own ability, beyond one's group, beyond one's clique, beyond one's tribe, if you will. Each person began to work as they had ability. Sometimes perhaps we try and do things that are way outside of our gifting and our ability. It seems to me that this passage is suggesting that we become aware of what gifts and what abilities we've been given, and those are the ones that we want to operate in. And we need to allow other people to operate in the gifts and the abilities and the gifting that they've been given to operate in. So again, people were astonished because these were Galileans who were speaking. What many of us may not be aware of is that in terms of the Roman Empire, Galilee was the backwater. In fact, all of Israel was really the one of the least glamorous, least sophisticated parts of the Roman Empire. And Galilee would have been one of the least sophisticated, one of the more poor, as they say, backwater towns in all of the Roman Empire. And so the whole idea that some folks coming from Galilee were speaking with these abilities was mind-blowing and astounding. The Galileans were of the lowest social status. Our social status does not matter in the eyes of the Holy Spirit. God works on us all. God moves and works on us all. We don't have to have a special status to receive and operate in the gifts of the Spirit. And again, we don't want to limit. There are many, many gifts. There are many different ways the Spirit manifests itself in our lives. Again, in Corinthians, Paul had a list of things, but included faith, hope, and love. The capacity to have faith, the capacity to have hope, the capacity to move and live and operate in love. That is the gift of the Spirit. In the Gospel of John, it was the capacity to offer forgiveness and to receive forgiveness. That is a gift of the Spirit. And here in Acts, they're focusing in on the whole idea of communicating, of being able to reach out beyond our own boundaries, to be able to reach out in our own groups. And it's the gift of being able to communicate and to understand one another and to understand. So as we went down, Peter had a chance to reflect on what this gift of the Holy Spirit meant. And Peter found his inspiration from the prophet Joel, through the prophet Joel, that in those last days, God declares, "I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh." One of the things that we see is that God pours God's Spirit out on everyone. God pours God's Spirit out on everyone. All flesh, that wasn't just all the prophet, and then in Peter quoting the prophet wasn't just limiting it to the Jews or the proselytes or the righteous. All flesh is everyone. God pours God's Spirit out on everyone, all flesh, both sons and daughters alike, both young and old alike, that all of us can be inspired and see visions and dream dreams. One of the things that's remarkable to me is that when I encounter people from different cultures and different societies all over the world, there is an idea of what the good is, of what a moral and ethical life looks like, of what justice looks like, and what fairness looks like, and how we should actually treat those who have been oppressed. There are people who have that vision of God's liberation and freedom. I believe that vision comes from God, and God has, even as we speak, pouring out that vision, pouring out that experience upon everyone, and we are able to dream dreams of a better world, of a world where we practice mutual shalom. It gives us the ability to see visions of how we can go about building that world and creating that world and living in that world. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, I will pour out my Spirit, and they shall prophesy. It gives us the ability to have hope and to prophesy and to speak that the world, as God envisioned it for us, will in fact be the world that we shall obtain and live in. The gospel in Luke Acts is the second part of Luke Acts. In the beginning of Luke, which is part of, again, this 2-volume set of Luke Acts, it talks about Jesus, and Jesus begins his public ministry by taking the scroll and reading from the book of Isaiah. And part of that, and in part of those words and part of that selection, it talked about how the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to proclaim good news to the poor. It also included freedom for the captives. The Spirit of the Lord is upon us. We receive the gift of the Holy Spirit, and it's being poured out not just on us, not just people who look like us, who think like us, or believe exactly like us. The Spirit is being poured out on all flesh, and God is giving us a vision of what it means to be good news to the poor, giving us a vision of what it means to set free those who are in bondage. God's Spirit is being poured out on all humanity right now, and we're being given a vision of a better way of living and a better way of being, and we're being given the vision of dreaming dreams. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Everyone who responds to this vision, who embraces this vision, who walks in this vision, will experience it in this life and beyond. Let us embrace the gift of the Holy Spirit moving and working on us. Let us walk in our gifts. Let us see our dreams. Let us proclaim our dreams and our visions. Truly, we expect to see and live in a world where God's will is done on earth as it is already done in heaven. Peace be with you.